Sometimes a single moment of compassion can rewrite the destiny of strangers forever. When a powerful businessman spotted a young mother clutching her baby at a city bus stop on a frigid winter night, he had no idea his little daughter would say something that would transform all their lives in ways none of them could imagine. What began as one man's decision to help would become a story about second chances, unexpected family bonds, and the kind of love that heals even the deepest wounds. If you enjoy this story, a like or subscribe would mean the world to us. Don't forget to let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Snowflakes drifted gently through the air, shimmering beneath the golden glow of Boston's winter lights. The streets were alive with evening energy, families bundled in scarves and coats, couples laughing beneath strings of twinkling bulbs, children pointing excitedly at shop windows decorated with snowmen and reindeer. The black Mercedes pulled up near a quiet bus stop just a few blocks from Boston Common. David Harrison stepped out first, tall and composed, his dark overcoat brushing against his crisp charcoal suit. He extended his hand, and a little girl with curls the color of autumn leaves jumped down into the fresh layer of snow. "Stay close, sweetheart," he said gently, adjusting her red knit hat. "We'll walk through the park, then head home for hot chocolate." Okay, Daddy," Riley beamed, holding his hand tightly. The city felt magical that evening. Winter nights always did. But David's eyes were distant, as if the lights of the season could never quite reach him. It had been 3 years since he lost his wife to cancer. And though he tried his best to smile for Riley, the emptiness in his chest never fully healed. They walked slowly past the glowing storefronts, Riley chattering about snow angels and how many marshmallows they should put in their hot chocolate. But suddenly she stopped. Her voice fell to a whisper. "Daddy, why is that lady sleeping there?" David turned to where Riley was pointing, the old wooden bench at the edge of the bus stop. There, curled up beneath the flickering route sign, was a young woman. She looked barely 19. Her dark hair was messy, tangled with flakes of snow. She wore a thin, worn sweater that barely reached her wrists. In her trembling arms, she held something close to her chest. David stepped forward slightly, squinting. It was a baby, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. The infant lay still, cheeks red from the biting cold, tiny fingers poking out and trembling slightly in the wind. David's heart tightened. He instinctively reached for Riley's hand to keep walking. They were just strangers, after all. The city was full of stories you couldn't fix. But Riley pulled back. "Daddy," she said again, more firmly this time, eyes wide. "She has a baby. He's so little. Daddy, he's cold." David looked down at his daughter. Her small face was earnest, concern written in every innocent feature. For a moment he hesitated, his breath visible in the frosty air, mind swirling between logic and emotion. Then something shifted. Without a word, he slowly bent down and began to unwrap the soft blue scarf from Riley's neck. She said nothing, just watched as her father stepped toward the sleeping girl. Kneeling beside the bench, David gently laid the scarf over the baby, careful not to startle either of them. The infant stirred slightly, lips moving in his sleep. David glanced up at the young woman. Her skin was pale, almost blue around the edges of her lips. Her arms clutched the child tighter, even in unconsciousness, as if instinctively protecting him. He reached out a hand and touched her shoulder lightly. "Miss," he said, voice low but urgent. "Miss, you can't stay out here tonight." She didn't respond. David leaned closer, concern deepening. His voice broke just slightly. "Please wake up." The wind blew a little harder then, sending a chill through his spine. In the distance, a street musician could be faintly heard, playing Silent Night on his violin. And yet nothing about this moment felt silent. He turned back briefly and saw Riley watching him, not with fear, but hope. And that was all he needed. He turned back to the young woman, still kneeling, determination settling into his features. "You're coming with us," he said under his breath, not quite sure who he was trying to convince, her or himself. Isabella Chen awoke in a jolt of panic. The cold hit her first, sharp and biting. Then came the fear. Her arms clutched the bundle against her chest, her baby. Her eyes flew open. Snow was falling heavier now. Her back ached from the frozen bench. But what startled her most was the tall man kneeling beside her. The scent of expensive cologne and winter air clung to him. He was dressed in a tailored coat, leather gloves, and he was holding something in his arms. Her baby. "No," she gasped, lunging forward. "Give him back." The man didn't flinch. His voice was steady and low. "He's freezing. You need to come inside." She tried to stand, her legs trembling. "I don't need your pity." David Harrison studied her. Young, barely 19. Her dark hair was tangled and crusted with frost. Her lips were cracked. Her sweater stretched thin. But it was her eyes that held him, defiant, desperate, exhausted. The baby stirred weakly. David adjusted the scarf, his daughter's scarf, around the infant's small body. The child's skin was pale, his lips tinged blue. "I'm not offering pity," he said. "I'm offering warmth." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "People only help when they want something. I've learned that the hard way." A gust of wind cut through them. The baby let out a weak, wheezing cough, then another. David stood, holding the baby tighter. "You can come or not, but I'm not leaving him to freeze." For a moment, Isabella didn't move. Her arms ached for her son. Every part of her screamed to grab him back, to run. But something in the man's eyes stopped her. They weren't cruel. They weren't suspicious. They were kind, like a father's. She took a hesitant step. "His name is Lucas," she whispered. David nodded. "I'm David. My car's nearby." She glanced at her soaked shoes, then back at her baby, swaddled in a scarf that wasn't his, held by a man she didn't know. But her feet moved. She followed. Inside the Mercedes, the world felt surreal, warm, too quiet. Isabella curled up in the back seat, watching every move as David adjusted Lucas's blanket. A little girl peeked over the seat, watching her with wide, curious eyes. "She's so young," Isabella murmured. "She's 4, David replied, catching her gaze in the mirror. "Her name's Riley." Isabella nodded. "She's beautiful." For a moment, silence settled. Then Riley asked softly, "What's your baby's name?" "Lucas," Isabella said. Riley smiled. "He's really tiny, like a little angel." David's eyes flicked to the mirror again. Isabella was staring out the window, but he saw the shimmer of tears she wouldn't let fall. Isabella had once believed in happy endings before it all fell apart. She had been a senior in high school, honor roll student, planning to study graphic design. She loved creating art, capturing moments, bringing ideas to life. Her teachers praised her portfolio. Then came the boy, the promises, the mistakes, the test that turned positive. When she told him, he denied it was his. When she told her family, strict, traditional, unforgiving, they gave her an ultimatum. "You've brought disgrace to this house," her father said. "If you keep it, you leave." She left. No job, no money, no support. Just a child she hadn't been ready for, yet couldn't abandon. She bounced between shelters, then the streets. Food went to Lucas. Coats were wrapped around him. Every night was a fight to survive. This winter evening was just another night to get through. Until now. As the car moved smoothly through the snowy streets, Isabella broke the silence. "Why did you stop?" David didn't answer right away. He thought of Riley, of that first moment he held her after his wife's diagnosis. The silence that filled the house for 3 years. The weight of grief he couldn't shake. "I guess," he said finally. "Someone once told me that if you can help and don't, it's the same as walking away." Isabella looked at him. He was the type she usually avoided. Powerful, composed, wealthy. But there was something else. Not in his suit, not in the car, but in his voice. It wasn't belief in her, but belief in doing what's right. She looked at Lucas, now sleeping soundly in the arms of a stranger, wrapped in a child's scarf, breathing easier. For the first time in months, the weight in her chest loosened. She leaned back against the seat, arms still curved on her lap like she was holding Lucas. David glanced at her once more in the mirror. He didn't smile, but something in his face softened, and for the first time in 3 years, this winter evening felt different. The elevator doors opened to reveal the top floor of one of Boston's most exclusive high-rises. Isabella had never seen anything like it. Warm light poured across polished hardwood floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sweeping view of the snowy skyline. In the corner stood a towering tree glowing with silver and gold ornaments. It looked like a scene from a magazine. Her breath caught. David stepped out carrying Lucas. Riley skipped ahead, calling, "Come on, this is your room, baby Lucas." She disappeared into a guest room, turning on a soft nightlight shaped like a star. A small crib stood nearby, unused since Riley was a baby, but spotless. Isabella hovered in the doorway, arms crossed tightly. She didn't step inside. David noticed. "You're safe here," he said gently. "Take the room. Rest. We'll talk in the morning." Isabella gave a small nod. Once he left, she sat on the edge of the bed, still in her coat. After a moment, she laid Lucas in the crib and sat beside him, one hand resting on his chest. It was the first night she didn't sleep with one eye open. The next morning, Isabella rose early. She found the laundry room by accident and washed Lucas's blanket and her sweater, still smelling faintly of the street. Then, in the kitchen, she wiped the spotless counters and made a simple breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast. She was rinsing the dishes when David walked in, still in his robe. "You're up early," he said, surprised. Isabella shrugged lightly. "I work for what I use. Always." He looked at her for a moment. There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet dignity. "I'll make the coffee," he said. Later that morning, Mrs. Eleanor Walsh arrived. She had worked for the Harrisons for over a decade. Practical, sharp, loyal. She immediately noticed the extra dish in the sink, unfamiliar footprints, and the faint scent of baby powder. She found David in his study. "Sir," she said quietly, "we have a guest." David nodded. "Her name is Isabella. She and her baby will be here for a while." Eleanor frowned. "You don't know her. What if she's just after your money?" "It happens, especially to men like you." David closed his book. "She was sleeping at a bus stop with her infant. I don't think this is a scheme." Eleanor hesitated. "Even so, kindness should be measured, especially with Riley in the house." Neither noticed Isabella standing in the hallway, holding a clean towel. She had heard everything. Without a word, she turned back into the guest room and quietly began packing. She dressed Lucas with shaking hands, folding the blanket, pressing it close around him. "Let's go, baby," she whispered, "before we wear out our welcome." She opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. Riley came running, nearly knocking her off balance as she wrapped her arms around Isabella's legs. "Please don't go," she cried. "Mommy used to say helping others is the best gift. You and Lucas are our gift." Isabella froze. Then came footsteps. She looked up to see David standing at the end of the hallway, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. He had heard everything. Eleanor's doubt, Isabella's quiet retreat, Riley's pleading. And in that moment, he was back in a hospital room 3 years ago, holding his wife's hand as she whispered, "Be kind, David, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He swallowed, his voice soft. "You're not using us, Isabella. You're doing everything but that." She stood still, arms wrapped around her child. David stepped forward. "Please stay." The days after that passed gently, wrapped in soft music and firelight. The kind of warmth Isabella hadn't known in a long time. She spent her mornings in the sunroom, a quiet space with tall windows and a snow-dusted view of Boston Common. David had once used it as a reading nook, but it quickly became Isabella's studio. In a forgotten corner, she found a box of old art supplies, charcoal, sketch pads, brushes. She asked if she could use them. "They were my wife's," David had said. "She used to paint here." Riley joined Isabella each morning, dragging her blanket and hot cocoa, plopping beside her with endless requests. "Can you draw a puppy? Can you draw me with wings? Can you draw Daddy with a funny hat?" Isabella would laugh and sketch, her hands quick and gentle. But one morning, Riley sat quietly, hands folded, watching Isabella without saying a word. Isabella didn't ask why. She just started drawing. That night, David came home to Riley running into his arms. "Isabella made you something," she said proudly. "But you can't see it until after dinner." Later in the sunroom, Isabella was tidying up her sketches when Riley handed David a folded piece of paper. He opened it and froze. It was a drawing of him and Riley beside the park fountain. He was kneeling, tying her shoelace, and Riley looked up at him with a tiny hand on his shoulder. Warm lights surrounded them like a quiet halo. David stared at it for a long time. "I didn't even know you saw that," he murmured. Isabella, standing near the window, said softly, "I notice things people forget to see." He looked at her, really looked, and something passed between them, silent, honest, unspoken. 2 nights later, over breakfast, David looked up from his coffee. "There's a charity gala this weekend. Would you go with me?" Isabella blinked. "Me?" He gave a small smile. "You'd be saving me from a lot of awkward conversations." She hesitated. "I don't exactly have a dress for something like that." "We can take care of that," he said simply. On the night of the event, Isabella wore a deep navy dress, simple, elegant, her hair curled loosely around her face. The only jewelry she wore was a small silver pendant that Riley had begged her to borrow. They stepped into the grand ballroom, and Isabella instantly felt every eye on her. She stayed close to the edge of the room, quiet, observing. David introduced her to a few people. She smiled politely, nodded where needed, but mostly kept to herself. Later, standing near the dessert table, she held a glass of champagne she hadn't touched when a woman's voice cut through the noise. Well, if it isn't the charity case turned date. Isabella turned slowly. The woman was tall, polished, someone clearly from David's circle. Her smile was sweet and sharp. I knew I recognized you, she said. You were the one on Commonwealth Avenue, right? Sleeping on a bench with a baby. Sweet little rags to riches story. Bet it makes for great press. Isabella's fingers tightened around her glass, but her face stayed calm. She didn't answer. She simply turned and walked out into the snow. David found her minutes later, standing beneath a street lamp as snowflakes gathered in her hair. She didn't turn when he approached. You didn't have to come after me, she said quietly. Yes, I did. He slipped off his coat and wrapped it over her shoulders. You didn't deserve that. You never have to explain yourself to anyone. Not anymore. She finally looked at him. Her eyes, so often guarded, were open, soft. And in that moment, David wasn't the man who had rescued her. He wasn't a CEO or a millionaire. He was simply someone who saw her, really saw her. And for the first time, she let herself be seen. The late afternoon sun cast a soft golden light across Boston Common, where families strolled through the snow-lined paths and children laughed, tossing snowballs beneath bare trees. Isabella pushed the stroller slowly, one hand clutching the handle, the other wrapped tightly around her coat. Lucas was bundled up and fast asleep, his tiny hat slipping slightly to one side. The soft hum of the city around her felt oddly peaceful until she heard a familiar voice. A voice she hadn't heard since the day she left home. Isabella. Her body went cold before she turned. There, standing just off the path near a bench, was her mother. Same pristine posture, same tailored coat, same eyes, sharp, unreadable. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Her mother took one look at Lucas in the stroller, then back at Isabella with barely concealed judgment. You shouldn't be here, her mother said flatly. Not in public, not like this. Isabella said nothing, her jaw tightening. You chose shame, her mother continued, voice like ice. So don't expect love. Then, without another word, the woman turned and walked away, heels clicking against the pavement, disappearing into the crowd. Isabella stood frozen, not shocked, not surprised, just hollow. That night, the penthouse was quiet except for the soft crackling of the fireplace. Isabella had said little since she returned. She had fed Lucas, bathed him, tucked him into bed. Now she sat silently in the corner of the living room, lost in thought. David was upstairs finishing a call, but Riley was still awake, playing with crayons and paper near the tree. After a few minutes, Isabella heard her voice. Look, Isabella, Riley said proudly. It's your house. Isabella looked over. In Riley's tiny hands was a drawing she had taken from Isabella's sketchbook, a watercolor painting Isabella had done days earlier but never showed anyone. In it was a small, cozy home. Warm light glowed from the windows. Snow covered the roof. In front of the house stood 4 figures, Isabella, David, Riley, and baby Lucas, all holding hands beneath a tall tree strung with golden lights. Riley pointed at each figure in turn. That's me. That's baby Lucas. That's Daddy. And that's you. She smiled up at Isabella, completely certain. This is our family now, right? Isabella didn't speak. Her throat burned. Her chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with pain, at least not the kind she was used to. She crossed the room slowly and knelt beside Riley, pulling her and the drawing into her arms. She held Riley tightly, her hand shaking as she brushed a kiss across the child's forehead. Then she reached out and pulled Lucas's blanket from the stroller nearby, hugging both children close, her heart overflowing. And for the first time, she cried. Not from rejection, not from loneliness, but because in that quiet room filled with warmth and firelight, she finally felt like she belonged. She wasn't alone anymore. A few moments later, David stepped into the room. He stopped when he saw her on the floor holding both children, her shoulders trembling in silence. The painting lay beside her, and the firelight shimmered against the tears on her cheeks. He walked over slowly, crouched down, and rested a hand gently over hers. "You've carried the world on your shoulders," he said softly. "Let someone carry you now." Isabella looked up at him, eyes red, cheeks wet, but smiling for the first time through the pain. And in that single moment, something shifted between them. Not pity, not rescue, but recognition of two people who had known loss, who had learned to live with it, and who, for the first time in a long time, didn't have to do it alone. The storm rolled in fast that night. Snow swirled outside the penthouse windows, blanketing the city in white silence. Inside, the fireplace flickered warmly, but the peace didn't last. It started with a soft whimper. Isabella rushed to the nursery where Lucas lay restless, his tiny arms twitching under the blanket. His cheeks were flushed a deep, alarming red, and sweat clung to his hairline. When she touched his forehead, her heart dropped. He was burning up. "Lucas," she whispered, lifting him into her arms. His body was hot, too hot. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. "Lucas, baby, look at me." Panic set in. She grabbed the thermometer, fumbled it into place. 104.2. She gasped, pressing him closer to her chest. "David!" she shouted, her voice cracking. He appeared in seconds, still buttoning the cuff of his dress shirt. He had been getting ready for a midnight video call, something high stakes with investors in Tokyo. But the look on Isabella's face stopped him cold. "He's burning up," she said, her voice shaking. "He won't wake up, David. I don't know what to do." David took one look at Lucas's limp frame and didn't ask another question. 10 minutes later, the Mercedes tore through the snowy streets of Boston, tires crunching over slush and ice. David's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Isabella sat in the back, cradling Lucas, whispering his name over and over, as if the sound of her voice could anchor him to this world. "Please, baby, please stay with me." Riley had stayed behind with Eleanor. David hadn't even bothered to explain the canceled meeting. He had simply tossed his phone aside and said, "Tell them I'm not coming. My family needs me." The hospital waiting room was cold and too bright. The receptionist spoke in hushed tones. A nurse whisked Lucas from Isabella's arms, while another guided them toward a curtained room. Isabella followed, dazed, until her knees buckled into the nearest chair. David remained standing, watching through the glass pane in the door as the pediatric team hovered over the tiny crib. And then he heard a soft breath beside him. Isabella had fallen asleep, her head tilted to the side, dark circles under her eyes. Exhaustion had finally won. David turned. He reached into his coat and gently placed it over her shoulders. Then, with the softest touch, he pushed a lock of hair behind her ear. She stirred but did not wake. He knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he whispered. And so is he. He turned back toward the window, staring at the tiny boy now wrapped in medical blankets, an oxygen mask gently placed over his nose. David walked into the room, pulled up a stool, and sat beside the crib. The machines beeped steadily. Lucas looked even smaller now, his hand barely the size of David's thumb. David reached out and took the baby's hand in his own. It fit perfectly. He sat like that for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stayed, holding on, as if by sheer presence alone he could anchor Lucas back to health. Not once did he think about the meeting he had missed. Not once did he regret it. Because in that moment, it didn't matter if Lucas was his by blood. What mattered was that he was his by choice. Hours passed. The snow outside continued to fall in thick silence. Isabella stirred awake, eyes fluttering open to the sterile lights above her. She looked around in a daze and then spotted them. David, asleep now, sitting in the hard plastic chair beside Lucas's bed, his head resting against the wall, one arm still draped protectively over the crib. She covered her mouth with one hand, the tears coming fast and quiet. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time since Lucas was born, someone had stayed. The days after Lucas's fever broke felt like waking from a long, dark dream. He was back to his babbling, smiling self, and Isabella barely let him out of her arms. Relief slowly replaced fear. The hospital stay had shaken her, but something deeper had stayed with her. David had stayed without question or hesitation. That kind of loyalty was something she had never known. One crisp morning, as the snow outside began to melt into slush, Isabella stood in the kitchen making coffee. Her voice was calm but sure. "I should start looking for work." David looked up. "You don't have to rush." "I want to," she replied. "I need to earn my way." He nodded, recognizing something in her tone, a quiet strength. Isabella didn't survive by depending. She survived by standing. He didn't press further, but something in his mind had already shifted. 2 weeks later, he took her to a small art gallery tucked between shops on Newbury Street. The sign above the door read, "Chen & Co. Art Studio." She stared. "Chen?" she asked softly. "Just go in," he said with a small smile. Inside, golden lights bathed the walls. Jazz music played low, and every piece of art hanging inside was hers. Sketches, watercolors, studies of the city and people. And there, under a spotlight, was the painting of David tying Riley's shoelace beneath the park lights. "I don't understand," Isabella whispered. "I remembered something you said," David replied, "that you didn't just want to paint. You wanted to share what you see. So I bought this place. It's yours." Her voice trembled. "David, I can't accept this." "You already did," he said gently. "Every time you picked up a pencil, every time you saw what others missed." People began arriving. Friends, locals, supporters. Champagne glasses clinked. Isabella stood near the corner, overwhelmed, her heart racing. Then David stepped forward to address the room. The crowd hushed. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "It's not every day we get to witness something as rare as this. Not just talent, but true heart." He turned to Isabella. "This is Isabella Chen, the artist, the mother, and the woman who reminded me what love really is." The silence that followed was complete. Isabella stood still, tears welling. She had never been seen this way, not as someone to fix, not as a charity case, but as someone worthy. Slowly, applause spread across the room, growing louder. Isabella felt something rise inside her, break loose from years of being unseen. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain, not from shame, but from recognition and belonging. Later that night, long after the guests had gone, Isabella stood in the gallery alone, gazing at her painting. David stepped quietly beside her. I meant every word, he said. She turned to him, heart full. He stepped closer. You gave even when you had nothing. You made a home for your son. You reminded me what it means to feel. That's not something people just do. Her voice was barely a whisper. Why me? He smiled, warm and steady. Because you never asked to be seen, but you let me see you anyway. And this time when she leaned into him, it wasn't with fear. It was with love. It was with trust. It was home. The snow fell lightly, like confetti from the clouds, dusting the trees and hedges of the garden in a gentle shimmer of white. It was exactly 1 year since that night at the bus stop, and everything had changed. The backyard of the Harrison home had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Twinkling lights lined the wooden fence, and a fire pit crackled softly nearby. A long table was set with art supplies, brushes, palettes, paints, and thick paper. Riley had insisted that this year, instead of gifts, they would all paint memories. So that was what they were doing. David sat beside Isabella on the bench, a warm plaid blanket thrown over their laps. Lucas, now just over a year old, sat nestled between them, giggling as he smeared blue paint across his little fingers. Riley stood at the table, tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on drawing a house with 4 stick figures under a tree. One taller, one with curls, one with a ponytail, and one very small with a big smile. Isabella glanced at her daughter's work, a soft laugh slipping from her lips. You're getting really good, you know. I learned from the best, Riley said proudly, without even looking up. Isabella smiled, her cheeks flushed pink in the winter air, her dark hair catching the last rays of the afternoon sun. The light danced around her, making her look like something out of the very stories she used to only dream about. David turned to look at her, and for a moment he forgot everything else. The business meetings, the losses, the years of loneliness. All he could see was this: Isabella radiant with joy, Lucas safe and warm in his arms, Riley laughing under the sky. The kind of peace that doesn't come from perfection, but from healing. Then Riley's voice broke through the quiet. Daddy. David looked up. Are we a family now? The question hung in the air for a moment, soft, simple, but echoing so much more than it seemed. He looked at Isabella, at Lucas, at the little girl who had asked that question once before, long ago, pointing at a stranger on a bench and unknowingly changing all their lives. He pulled them all closer, Isabella against his side, Lucas cradled to his chest, Riley wrapping her arms around them. He smiled, voice steady and full. Forever, sweetheart. Forever. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the snowy yard, the 4 of them stayed close, brushes in hand, hearts in sync. There had once been 4 broken pieces, scattered in different places across the city. A grieving man, a lost young woman, a motherless child, and a baby born into uncertainty. But somehow, by grace or fate or something in between, those pieces had found one another, and now they fit perfectly. Together, they painted a picture of home,